What the hell are you talking about? We make toys. Well, I mean, not quite. Video games are really kind of more than that, I think. I mean, just a few of us managed to make 60% of the profit just by ourselves. I think it would just be more fair. Fair. You want to talk about fair. You came onto this company, signed the contract, we give you good money. This is what you agreed to. And I get that, but we just think... How many of you are there? Just 4? Let me guess. Larry, Alan, well, if you Bob listen to what I'm saying, we can draft a new contract and out of the question. You are with us, and leaving will be the biggest mistake of your career. And I get that. You don't even have a console. How are you going to make it in this industry? You can't compete with us. You are nothing without Atari. I guess we'll see. How's it going? We're going to talk about E.T. by Atari. But before we do, there is some context that we do have to lay down. First things first, the influence that Atari had as a company during the infancy of the video games medium. While technically the first video game beat them to the punch by about 14 years, Atari really was behind the first marketable game. With Pong released in 1972, that's kind of what gave the industry its legs. And with all the money that Atari had garnered from that, they hired 35 brand new developers to join the team, 4 of which were very talented: David Crane, Larry Kaplan, Alan Miller, and Bob Whitehead. And they weren't super excited about how Atari was handling things. See, the video game industry at the time was a lot different than the video game industry now. And while you and I may know who Masahiro Sakurai and Hideo Kojima are, you would not know who Larry Kaplan is, because the video game industry was a lot less like a media industry and a lot more like a toy industry. And so instead of getting paid royalties and getting credit, they were paid a flat rate of $22,000 a year. Which isn't a great rate considering how much money these guys were bringing in for Atari. It was so common knowledge to Atari how important these guys were that they had their own nickname. The Gang of Four is what these developers were called. And they brought in 60% of the overall revenue for Atari in the fiscal year of 1979, just by themselves. And so the fact that they weren't seeing any of that dough, yeah, they were rightfully pretty pissed. And so when Raycaster refused to budge on their pay, they split off, and that is what created Activision. A name, mind you, that's pretty funny in context. So technically Activision is just a combination of the words activity and television. But the reason why Jim decided to choose those first words, and he was their first CEO, is because they wanted to appear first in the phone book in order to spite Atari. They also did something pretty cool besides that. They established the third-party development system. It's the system we use today for studios, where ultimately they didn't want to make a new console and figure out a new way to make games. They wanted to make games that they were used to. And so instead, they decided to make games for the Atari. And Atari wasn't super fond of the idea of their foremost talented developers becoming a competitor to them on their own system. And that led to a 3-year legal battle. And thus, the third-party system was created, which just opened the floodgates to just so much bullshit. See, now that Activision had ratified third-party as a legitimate business model, and not just business model, but, system that we now use, that meant that a bunch of third-party studios came in, like vultures, and blew up the fucking shelves. And this led to a massive push for retailers to now save a bunch of space for the new consoles and cartridges, etc., from all the new companies that rose up from the woodwork. And when a market expands that quickly, that fast, it is incredibly delicate and volatile. And that is why we call it a bubble. A bubble that's best kept far, far away from... Whew. E.T. is doing great, it looks like. Kiddo sure knocked it out of the park. I bet this would do great on that, the Atari thing I bought a bit ago. I wonder if Ray would be interested in that sort of thing. Hello? Hey, Ray, I was watching this movie my baby boy made for us, and, E.T., I was wondering if you'd be interested in making a kind of game like that. What, like the Alien movie with the kid? Yeah, I mean, it's doing great. I figured kids love that kind of thing, so why not, That sounds like a terrible idea. Well, you better figure it out. I already dropped $80 million on the licensing, so you better make it happen. And by Christmas, too. I want to give it to Spielberg for our holiday breakfast. Hey, my man, my main guy. Hey, yeah, what's up, dude? Yeah, man. So listen, the Spielberg just asked you to make a game. Really? Yep, he did. Oh wow. Yeah. Got off the phone with him just now. He says he's a big fan. He did. Yeah. So okay, here's the pitch. Right. Yeah. So like, imagine E.T. Like the movie. Yeah, something like that. But you know, imagine E.T. Is there more? No, but I'll give you 200,000 and a trip to Hawaii. Why? Well, it needs to be done by the winter slate, which is in 16 weeks. Oh, okay. So 5 months. Challenging enough, but I might be able to pull something off. Production takes 10 weeks. Huh. It's not like Atari didn't feel it when Activision split off. In fact, Activision took a massive fucking bite out of their shareholder value and was taking increasingly large nibbles. With every single release that came out that did absolute gangbusters because their 4 greatest developers were on Activision, they really needed an ace in the hole to rival what Activision was putting out, as well as all these shitty third parties that came from God knows where. And for some godforsaken reason, they really thought that the move here was E.T., critically acclaimed kids movie. They pushed all their chips in here. Game journalists, advertisements, game magazines, the whole shebang. They needed this game to be a hit. And since E.T. was such a large property from the movie, they were so confident that they made more copies of E.T. than actual Ataris. Why would you do that? Howard took on the project as a little bit of a challenge. See, he wanted to see if he could compress his dev cycle by 3 times and come up with a playable and enjoyable product. And regardless if the answer to that was yes or not, he did have to eventually show off his new thing to Steven Spielberg. Okay, so watching your movie, it was a little bit of a challenge to sort of imagine how this would translate to a game, but I had an idea I think you're gonna love. Sure. So a lot of the tension was E.T. kind of dodging the adults and calling home. Right. So I thought, what if he collected part of the phone around the map? And then he'd be like avoiding adults, and that'd be the challenge. So he collects the pieces, and then you phone home. Can't you just do something like Pac-Man? No, yeah, but like that doesn't carry the same weight, right? Yeah, that's why I wanted to go this direction. I'm not really sure you can really capture E.T. on the Atari, much less with the time you have. I just kind of figured it'd be more arcade. I'm gonna tell you right now, whoever's watching this, don't let this game slander Howard's legacy, because Howard, at the same time as developing E.T., developed 2 other games that did great commercially and were playable and fun. And those 2 games were Yar's Revenge and Raiders of the Lost Ark. Those were the big 2. But there is a small hair in my soup about that. See, they were great games, but they had a very key difference from E.T. That's very important. They took a minimum of 6 months to build. And so, while those games did come up, fine for what the Atari is capable of, the constraints of E.T. led to... Alright, speedrun. I vaguely know how this works now, and at this point, I'm fairly certain that... Oh, what the fuck is that? What? Okay, never mind. I have no clue what the fuck I'm looking at. Cool, and... Oh, wow. Okay, I'm in jail now. That's not a timer on the screen, by the way. That's an indicator of, like, how many steps you're allowed to take, which I think is actually weirder than it just being a timer. E.T. dies. Why did E.T. die? I'm back? What? Oh my god. And for some enigmatic reason that I can't really grasp or fathom, that just didn't resonate with audiences. But, ultimately, the Christmas of 1983 did come around, and E.T. did sell. and it sold big, selling 2.6 million copies, and then 670,000 of those were returned. Ooh, not great. Remember how important this game was. This was Atari's trump card. This was how Atari was going to get their respect back in the industry, was with this game. They tried so hard to make this game push. They spent millions, $80 million on the rights for the game to even exist, and then millions more on the advertising push. And it didn't even crack top 5 best-selling Atari games, and everybody hated this thing. It garnered a new reputation as the games that tone-deaf grandmothers would buy their kids that didn't really know what video games were. This failure led to Atari losing 30% of its stock. An already plummeting stock, mind you, that Atari was losing grasp of thanks to the rise of third-party developers. And everybody felt this, not just Atari, because Atari was the main giant superpower even at the time where Atari's popularity was starting to fall a little bit. Atari was still the major big hitter of the industry, and so when Atari dropped 30% in its stock price in a single day, they took their stock and they ran, and they threw it back to Atari post-haste. But this was just the beginning. See, at the end of the day, E.T. was not the end of the crisis. E.T. was just the harbinger of video games as an industry dropped from 3.2 billion to 100 million. A fall of 97%. While E.T. didn't single-handedly destroy the video games industry, it was definitely a contributing factor. And you can definitely see the effect on the pricing of cartridges and consoles. And while it's crazy to think that back then video games were more expensive considering what you were getting, they were actually charging $116 a pop only for that drop to 15% after the market crash. It really didn't help that at the same time the Commodore released and PC gaming started to be the mainstay shift for the public, which did make sense. I mean, parents bought computers for work, and so they would buy it as a tool for work that then could also entertain the family. It was a multi-universal entertainment device. And so the point of an Atari just stopped existing, really. All of this working together meshed into $395 million of lost stock to Atari, which is not something that company could handle. All right, everybody, thank you for gathering. I'm sorry to say we're really in the red, guys. Unfortunately, we're going to have to do some layoffs. How many are some? 30%.
Sir, is this a bad time?
No, it's fine. What's up?
Well, 4 million copies of E.T. are sold.
Why do we have 4 million copies of E.T.?
Corporate wanted to make sure we had enough.
I am corporate. How did this... How's our warehouse? Do we have enough space for 4 million copies of any game?
That's actually why I'm here, sir. Did you want us to do something with them, or...?
Christ's sake. Get rid of them! Shoot them off into the sun! Bury them in New Mexico! I don't care how! Get that shit out of my life!
I don't think Atari is in any position to launch anything into space.
Get out of my office!
Despite being the industry's primary superpower, Warner could no longer justify the cost of Atari after this massive loss, and ended up selling the company to Jack Tramiel, who then elected to bring Atari to a more PC universal field. And that was the end of console gaming in the States for about the next 2 years, until a certain red-hatted plumber came and fixed everything. When the Nintendo Entertainment System did finally come to the States, the reason why it wasn't called the Famicom was to avoid the Atari association. See, after Atari had just basically ate concrete, they didn't want to tell retailers that, hey, we're another cartridge console about to lose you a lot of money. And so, in order to avoid console-based language, they called the Nintendo Entertainment System a control deck that didn't have cartridges, it had
game packs. And this, along with being sold with the End Zapper and the Rob robot, was enough to convince everybody that this isn't going to fail like the Atari. And they were right. Not because the NES is not a games console, that was kind of a lie. The reason was because Nintendo had set a standard of quality that had been unprecedented by the likes of Atari. And so much so that 76% of all video game sales in the year 1986 were by Nintendo games. Before we come to a close here, I did want to take a moment and appreciate this game. Not for what it is, or for what it stands for, or about the passion that was clearly not put into it. I want to appreciate this game because it was so bad, it proved to the industry that quality was imperative for the consumer. See, without this game, without Atari's downfall, without the crash of 1983, I'm not 100% sure that we would actually improve at the rate we did. I'm not 100% convinced that without this game, we'd be getting the Resident Evil 7s and the Yokai Watches and the Dead Spaces. Because this game was the standard at the time. At 1978 to 1983, it was expected that basically you'd give them $100 for a cartridge that gave you a game that wasn't fun, didn't play well, and didn't look good. And that only changed once this game came out. And so because of that, I'm thankful for E.T. I'm thankful for Atari, and I'm thankful for Ray Kassar being a huge dick, because that means that I get to enjoy the games that I love today. You made it to the end of the video, and that's good news for me, because I've never made a video like this with such high production value. So if that is something that was entertaining to you, if that was something that you thought was cool, then maybe you'd subscribe, so that way I know I'm doing a good job and I can keep doing stuff like this, and you get to watch more of it. That's the trade here. That's kind of the thing. So go watch my other videos. They're not as cool as this one yet, I think. I guess I don't know when you're subscribed. I'm glad you enjoyed the video. Have a good night.